All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get us started with some housekeeping things, and then we'll get it turned over to Tony for the meat and potatoes of the evening, if you will. So, my name is Dr. Rebecca Mears. I'm a member of the VIN Foundation Student Debt Education Team. Very excited to be here with you all. Congrats on graduating soon for those of you that are 2025 grads joining us. Really excited to be here. It's just it really is one of my favorite things that we do all year is this webinar. So it's a good time, lots of really great information. I'm sure you have a ton of questions, so we'll try to get through as many of those as we possibly can here live. So, like I said, a couple of housekeeping things. Any questions you have during the presentation, try and use the Q&A feature down at the bottom of your screen there for those. You can ask questions anonymously that way, and you can also upvote questions that way. So in case you see a question that you also want to know the answer to, that helps us to kind of prioritize what we answer live versus what gets a typed in comment. Or, a lot of times we'll try and do a follow-up Q&A as well. And so we kind of like to know what are some of those most common questions. Sometimes Tony will want some feedback from you all, so feel free to use the chat for that, as well as any technical issues, right? If you're having any issues with anything, just let us know and we'll help you try to troubleshoot that there in the chat. We will be recording this. That will be sent out. I will remind you of that because I'm sure somebody will ask again. It will be recorded. We'll send out a follow-up email with the link to the recording and some other helpful information as well. So that way, if there's something that you missed and you want to revisit it, you can absolutely do so. So we'll be doing all of that. We'll be also doing our prize drawings for the debt repayment prep challenge. Thanks to everyone who entered that. So we'll be doing the prize drawings for that throughout the webinar. So be sure to stay tuned. And with that, I think that's the bulk of everything. That email will come from studentdebt@vinfoundation.org. So keep an eye out for that. Make sure that that's in your send to be able to receive from inbox, because especially some of those .edus and things like to weed that out into spam. So just keep an eye out for that. And with that, Tony, there's a lot to discuss. So I am going to
There
give you as
is.
much time as I possibly can.
Well, thank you, Dr. Mears. So thanks everyone for joining. We got a lot to cover tonight, and thanks to everybody who participated in the debt repayment prep challenge on the student debt message board area. That was super helpful. There was a lot of great submissions. Learned a lot from there, updated a lot of this content to cater towards some of that. There was a lot of questions about consolidation, a lot of the I'm hearings, right? So I'm hearing this, that, or the other from whatever sources you're hearing them from. And some of those things that you're hearing are maybe a little bit accurate. Some of them are a little bit off, but we're going to try to put them all in context tonight, help you get started. I'm going to spend more time on more nuts and bolts kind of stuff. So, what do we know? How do you get started? What does selecting a repayment plan look like? What's the next few weeks look like? The next few months look like? Beyond that, it's a little bit difficult to talk about, right? Because as everybody also is concerned about is what's going on, behind the scenes, right? There's a lot of changes happening with student loan repayment options. Some have already taken place, some have yet to take place, and we have to wait and see what those are going to look like. But we can still kind of talk about what that means in the context of selecting your repayment plan, depending on where you're headed. I did see a lot of questions, and it's great to illustrate this. Some of the concerns that were submitted with your registrations, like tell me the best option for $300,000 of student debt, and to answer that question, we need more information, right? Regardless of what the number is. So whether it's 100,000, 300,000, 500,000, we need to know what you're doing, right? Where you're going, where you think your career might take you, what the income is going to be associated with that path. And then we can start working our way backwards to then help you choose that repayment option that will work best for that pathway. So, I know we focus a lot on the actual number, the student debt number, but all of those other things are equally important. And we're going to try to put all of those pieces together tonight. We will do those prize drawings throughout the session here. We'll probably do that a little bit a little bit later, not immediately here. We want to give everybody a chance to jump on and join, and hopefully some of the people who get drawn will be present as well. So we'll do that throughout the session tonight. So we've got 3 DoorDash gift cards, a couple of Getty mugs, and a Rumple blanket from VIN Foundation to donate. And if you completed the debt repayment prep challenge, or you submitted your student debt and income signalment form before the end of the day yesterday, then you're entered into that prize drawing. All right, so let's start off with the secret, the student loan repayment, right? But before I give you that, one of the things that I have noticed from your submissions, so this is a compilation of all the 2025 grads who have submitted signalment forms in the last couple of months. One of the things that I'm noticing, probably as a result of the uncertainty, is a desire to pay your loans back aggressively. And that makes sense at some level, right? I mean, the more uncertain things seem to be, the more you just want to kind of power through it, get done with it, not have to worry about what the long-term ramifications are of some of these things. However, we can't ignore the numbers, right? I mean, a lot of the numbers that I'm seeing in here for student debt totals are not necessarily going to be conducive to paying off your loans in 5, 7, 8, 10, or even 15 years, right? So we have to start doing a little bit of sanity checking as well on what that math looks like. Maybe your budget's going to allow for something like that, but it's a little bit too soon to tell, right? I mean, even those of you that might have received a signing bonus, or will receive a signing bonus, or are heading into areas of veterinary medicine where you are projected to earn, above average incomes, that hasn't happened yet, right? So, we kind of need to take a step back, look at our budgets, realize how much income we're going to have going in, what we're supposed to be doing with some of that, and then do we have the cash flow left over, right? The room in our budget left over on a regular basis to aggressively pay off our student loans, right? And then when we say aggressively, how much is that going to take, right? The sooner you want to pay your loans back, the more you're going to have to pay to them. And at some point, you're going to exceed the amount of income that you're earning, right? Especially for some of you with higher student loan balances. So we have to do some sanity checking there, just to make sure that we're not, putting ourselves in a worse position by doing so. All right, so we're going to, I think I must have screwed up my functionality here. So let me back up here a second and take this out of here. Sorry about that. All right. Okay, so the secret to student loan repayment is you're going to pay your balance to zero one way or another, right? You'll either pay your balance to zero because you earn enough income to generate a high enough payment that will eliminate your balance, or you'll hit forgiveness if you're using one of the income-driven repayment options. Either pathway is fine, right? Either of them end in a I'm done with my student loans result, right? The key is to not pay more than you have to towards your student loans, because when you do, you inevitably end up sacrificing more critical areas of your overall financial wellness. And that's where we see issues creep in, right? We postpone retirement savings, we postpone starting a family, we maybe take a career path that we're not terribly dead set on just because we want to accelerate our student loan payoff. We work more than we maybe have to, which can wear on you mentally and physically, right? So we do all of these things to try to accelerate our student loan payoff, but the end result of your federal student loans is you're going to hit zero balance one way or another, right? They're the most flexible but really annoying debt you're ever going to have. So there isn't a huge incentive to race to zero with your federal student loans, even given all of the uncertainty around them right now. So that's generally how I approach these sessions, is just with the idea that, look, a lot of you have a lot of different student debt and a varied career path. You're going to need to see some of that unfold before you have a really good idea of how much you're actually going to be able to contribute towards your student debt. And just taking random amounts of money and throwing it as your debt every once in a while is probably going to end up in some serious frustration, right? You may not end up accelerating that payoff. You're inevitably going to be redirecting those funds from other more critical areas of your financial wellness, which is just going to frustrate you all in general and then take longer to get to those goals that you have besides just paying off your student loans. So you have to know what your student debt is telling you. Kind of like when our patients come in the exam room, we start with a physical exam. We're going to do the same thing with our student loans. Knowing what our student debt details are will help us understand what repayment options we have, in addition to all of the changes that are happening and what is likely to happen there. We can make some adjustments based on what we see in our student loan physical exam and matching those against the changes that have happened and those that are coming down the pipeline. When and how to choose an option, right? That's going to be particularly relevant for you. This new section that I have this year called the consolidation conundrum, with the changes that have taken place so far. This is probably the most complex year you can enter repayment. It was a lot easier in prior years. It was just easier to recommend everybody consolidate their loans and choose repay or save. And unfortunately, those are not so straightforward anymore, right? So it's going to depend on what your student loans are telling you, what you're doing after graduation, and inevitably what your student debt to income ratio is along that pathway. We'll talk a little bit about how to apply, within the various ways. So whether you consolidate or don't consolidate, if you use an income-driven repayment plan, you'll have to renew your income information. If you haven't filed a tax return for 2024, I'm going to encourage you to do so still, especially if you don't plan on entering repayment until after your grace period ends. But we'll talk more about that in detail. There's going to be side effects of repayment no matter which pathway you choose, right? So if you want to pay your loans back as fast as possible, you're going to have the resources to do it. If you're going to use an income-driven repayment plan, you're going to have to stay tuned and navigate all of the uncertainty around those income-driven repayment plans to make sure that you're, keeping your loans in the best repayment strategy possible. And then we'll talk about some of those other more critical financial wellness items that you all should be participating in. Changes and complications have definitely made things more interesting this year, but that's really what we're going to focus on here tonight. So here's some of the concerns that came in, right? I really like this one because it goes across a whole bunch of ones that we're going to touch on. But my main concern is having payments that I can afford. Of course, that's what we all want, right? So while still being aggressive without feeling like I'm living paycheck to paycheck. I was told to select a 25-year plan, so my minimum monthly payment is lower, but aim to pay about $1,000 per month, which would be more reflective of a 10-year plan. And that's fine, right? But the only thing I would tweak there in this particular one is don't use a 25-year plan, use an income-driven plan, right? As we'll talk about, and I'll mention several times tonight, it's better to earn the forgiveness credit and not need it because you paid your balance to zero before reaching forgiveness than to get, 2, 3, 5, 10, 15 years into repayment and say, oh crap, I really could have used forgiveness, and then not have earned the credit to help you get there. And unfortunately, a 25-year plan won't earn you any forgiveness credit, right? So those are some of the things we want to make sure everybody's clear about tonight. Why shouldn't you just pay it off as fast as possible? Well, if your budget allows for it, go for it, right? But again, I'm seeing some pretty big numbers, right? And when I say big numbers, I'm saying student debt numbers, right? And income, yes, it's robust, right? It's a professional income for a veterinarian. That's great, right? But if your debt exceeds your income, you may have a difficult time paying your loans back as fast as possible. Or we need to adjust what fast means, right? So another part of that is defining what is fast for you or soon for you. Will I get screwed over if I start making more money in the future? Never, right? It's never a problem for you to make more money, right? It makes everything easier, right? Now, that's great when and if it happens and it also aligns with what you hope your career plans are, but it won't negatively impact you from a student loan repayment standpoint. We're all very confused about what is going on, not having access to the income-driven plans. There still are going to be income-driven plans, right? They may not look like they've looked the last 5, 10, 15 years. there are still going to be income-driven plans, and we'll talk about what that's likely to look like in just a few minutes here. I have heard people say to pay off as fast as possible, but then many financial advisors indicate the best plan is to plan for forgiveness. Yeah, and that's because when you do the math, particularly for a lot of veterinarians with debt to income ratios that are greater than one, it works out that paying the minimum and planning for forgiveness will save you significant amounts of money. Right. So that's why they're recommending that. Financial planners generally want you to have as much money as possible to work with so you can build your overall wealth and wellness. Right. So that's where we kind of bump up against, you know, some people are going to tell you pay it off as fast as possible, but then we have to do the math on that to see if that actually makes sense for your situation. And that's where the financial advisors can help you with that exercise as well. Financial security during my internship and residency. So when I read this one, I kind of chuckled a little bit. When you're doing internship and residency, I consider that more financial damage control. Right? You're probably not going to have a lot of security until after you finish the residency, right? But we will talk about how you can prevent your debt from, causing too much damage during those internships and residency training. We will approach this clinically, right? So doing a physical exam of your student loans, we'll do some diagnostics using the tools on the VIN Foundation Student Debt Center. And then from what we find there, we'll come up with some prescriptions and treatment plans. In the immediate, what are we looking at, right? So timeline, graduation, congratulations, right? From a student loan standpoint, I really want to know what my student debt to income ratio is. Now, this is something that I saw a lot of people struggle with in the debt repayment prep challenge, right? So I'm just going to do a quick example here. When I say student debt to income ratio, I'm just going to open up the calculator, or you can use your phone if you want. But if I've got, let's say, I'm going to keep the math simple here. If I've got $230,000 of student debt right now at graduation, and I divide that by, I divide that by my income that I expect to earn when I start practicing, maybe that's $130,000, right? My student debt to income ratio is, I did 200, yeah, is 1.7, 1.8, right? So that number by itself gives me an idea of what I should be thinking about in terms of the best repayment strategy, at least to get started with, right? And anything that is above one, the income-driven plan is going to help keep your minimum monthly payment lower so you can get started in your post-graduation position, update your budget so you're working from a post-school budget, and figure out how much money you have coming in and how much money is going out, right? So, especially in those early years, you want to make sure that you're have a better idea of your monthly ins, your monthly outs as it pertains to your income and expenses. Your direct loans are going to have a 6-month grace period. Interest is still going to accrue on those loans, right? So these are the loans that you borrowed for veterinary school. If you have loans from undergrad that haven't entered a grace period yet, then they'll enter a grace period as well, right? So it'll be 6 months, that same 6-month grace period. If you had some time off between undergrad and veterinary school and already used the grace period for those previous loans, then those loans will re-enter repayment now, right? Pretty much within the 30 days after graduating, right? So something that you're going to need to put on your calendar to take care of. So at least your loans are in good status if they enter repayment sooner rather than later, right? So those are loans that have already used up their grace period. If you have held professional student loans, which about 20% of you or so that filled out the signalment form indicated you do, they have a 12-month grace period, right? So a little bit longer than the direct loans. Held professional student loans, loans for disadvantaged students, a few of you indicated you had those as well, also have a 12-month grace period, right? No interest accrues during that time frame, and they are also eligible for internship and residency deferment where no interest will accrue, right? So this is where some of the consolidation conundrum starts to unfold, right? So should you use a direct consolidation loan? In a lot of cases, it'll make sense, right? The direct consolidation loan is the only way to end your grace period early. So one of the other things I saw repeated over and over is, oh, people are telling me that I should skip my grace period. You can't really skip your grace period. The only way to skip it is to consolidate your loans, right? So if you consolidate them, then you have an option to end the grace period, which will force your loans into repayment. If you don't consolidate, then you have to wait until that grace period ends. Even if you voluntarily make payments, that's fine, but they're not really going to count towards anything, right? They'll pay down some of your interest, but that's really it, and that's not like a great use of your money. So this is where, again, kind of that consolidation conundrum is starting to unfold. We have to decide, what do we want our minimum monthly payment to be, right? That's what choosing a repayment plan is all about, is establishing that minimum monthly payment, right? There is no plan that's named as fast as possible, right? You can't just say, I want to pay $1,500 towards my student loans, or I want to pay $700, right? The minimum monthly payments are established by the plan that you choose. And if you don't choose a plan and you don't consolidate your loans, then after your grace period expires, a repayment plan is automatically chosen for you. And it's a standard 10-year repayment plan. Right? So whatever your student loan balance is, whatever your interest rates are, the payment will be calculated based on that principal interest rate in an amount to eliminate that balance over a 10-year time frame. And those payments can be quite high, right? So you generally don't want to let the grace period expire and then just end up in the standard 10-year plan unless your debt to income ratio is less than 1. If it is, then it probably won't be a big deal as long as you're doing something that's not an internship or a residency, right? So these are all of the considerations that we're going to start putting together based on what is your debt, what is your income, what is your career path after graduation. How many of you filed a tax return, right? Type it in the chat if you did or didn't, right? I'm just kind of curious to know how many of you filed a tax return for 2024. I see some yeses in there. That's great. So having the tax return on file, particularly for an income-driven plan, means that no matter when you apply, whether that's through consolidation or it's after your grace period or as your grace period is expiring, you'll be able to use that most recent tax return, the tax return from the 2024 calendar year, as your income documentation for that income-driven repayment plan. If you didn't file a tax return, you still can, right? So as long as you don't owe any taxes, right? So there's a link in that, and it takes you to the WikiDebt area here on the Student Debt Center. But this is one that I put out recently because I get a lot of questions about, well, who can I file a tax return through if I don't owe any taxes? And unfortunately, the biggest provider, TurboTax, that everybody's familiar with, doesn't allow you to do that, right? But the IRS does list some providers that you can use that will allow you to submit that tax return, even if you don't owe any income or you aren't required to file a tax return. So if you haven't done it, you still can do it. It's not too late, right? It'll take a little while, right? After you submit a tax return, it takes a little bit of time for them to accept it. And then for that information to be eligible to be used when you apply for your repayment plan. But if you're not applying for a repayment plan right away, you've got some time for all of that to work out. We've also got
Tony,
some change.
a
Yep, go
common
ahead.
question that we get, and I already see here in our Q&A related to the tax returns, is what if I was claimed as a dependent?
Yeah, you can file a tax return even if your parents claims you as a dependent, right? So don't claim yourself as a dependent on that tax return. You can claim, zero dependence on that because somebody else already claims you as one. But you could still file a tax return even if your parents claimed you as a dependent on their tax return. Right? You can voluntarily file a tax return even if you're claimed as a dependent on somebody else's. You can voluntarily file a tax return if you didn't earn any income, right? So you just want that tax return is kind of the gold standard, if you will, when it comes to applying for an income-driven plan. They will always use that. They prefer that. Right? There are ways to apply without having a tax return handy, but it's just a little messier, right? And it takes a little longer and more mistakes can happen. So if you have that tax return filed, it's ideal because then the system is set up to just take that number right off that tax return, the adjusted gross income line item from your Form 1040, and that will flow through all of the calculations to make your payment. We do have some changes that we're keeping an eye on. There are some that have already happened. We're going to talk about that. But then there's some proposals that are in Congress right now that will dramatically change what repayment looks like. Thankfully, it's even if they do pass that new legislation, it doesn't look like those changes will take effect for probably a year or more, right? So you're still going to need to choose a plan now and get yourself from now to whenever those changes take place, right? So there's going to be some bridging here, right? And another thing we like to say when it comes to student loan repayment is there is no set it and forget it, right? You cannot forget about your student loans anymore. There's just too much going on, right? And forgetting about it can lead to some significant errors and things like delinquency, default, and things that can be difficult to recover from. So please, please, please just stay tuned enough to know what's going on or where to look so you can check in on your student loans on a semi-frequent basis until we do return to something that resembles stability, which is probably at least a year off before we get to something that looks a little more stable. Also want to start thinking about in the back of your mind, when might your income exceed your debt, right? So I've mentioned debt to income ratio a lot. I use that ratio in these discussions a lot. When do you think your income may exceed your student loan balance? Right. Some of you have an idea of that. Some of you might see that happen in the first 6 months here. Others may never see that. Right. The answers to those questions really help to know what strategies we should be leaning on based on what our best guess of when our income may exceed our student loan balance. All right, and here I'm going to leave this up here for a second. This is a table I built this week trying to work through, this just keeps coming up over and over again, right? And I see a lot of confusion from people on, hey, what's still available or what's not available. It does seem like everybody's gotten the memo that SAVE is kind of gone, right? If you haven't yet, here's your notice, right? So SAVE has been removed from the universe of repayment options for federal student loans. It's not on the application anymore. People that were already in it, like myself, like Dr. Mears, were in a forbearance, essentially waiting to see what is next for those folks that are in SAVE. It hasn't formally been eliminated, meaning that it's still kind of on the books, but nobody's able to apply for it. But it is looking like it's not going to be an option, or they're not going to be able to calculate any kind of monthly payment that works as SAVE or even the plan before it, which was called Repay. Pay as you earn is still available. You could still get forgiveness credit with it. A lot of you indicated that you are planning to use Pay as you earn. The big issue with Pay as you earn right now is you can't actually be granted forgiveness once you do reach the 20-year maximum repayment term. So you can still use it. It'll still count as forgiveness credit for income-driven repayment as well as public service loan forgiveness. But if you reach the 20-year time frame, presuming Pay as you earn was still around 20 years from now, you wouldn't be able to receive forgiveness at that 20-year time frame. Right? This is some of the nonsense that's unfolding with all of the recent court rulings and changes to student loans. Some of this column here I'm calling watchful waiting. I borrowed from the physicians. This is where these proposals are kind of working their way through the system. I don't know if this is going to get eliminated, but in the most recent proposal, they are going to eliminate it, right? And if they don't eliminate it, it's due to be phased out by July 1st of 2027, meaning that if you haven't chosen it by then, you wouldn't be able to choose it after July 1st of 2027. So pay as you earn is a little bit of a confusing one. The IBRs, right? There's two versions of income-based repayment. There's a newer version, right? It was very similar to pay as you earn. There's an older version for anybody that doesn't meet the new borrower requirements. So if you borrowed a loan before July 1st of 2014, then you wouldn't be eligible for this new version of IBR 2014. So you're either eligible for the new one or the old one. I'll show you how you can figure that out in the VIN Foundation Student Debt Center in just a few. But IBR 2014, which I suspect most of you are eligible for, is very similar to pay It's still on the books. It was written into law, right? So it doesn't have the fuzziness that pay as you earn has right now. However, in the most recent proposal by Congress, they're talking about eliminating it, which is going to be a neat trick, right? Because there are a lot of people that signed contracts like you all who took loans that have this new version of IBR baked into those contracts. So that's going to be an interesting one to see play out, right? So if they do pass that, I imagine that's going to end up with some legal challenges that we'll probably have to wait to see play out. So what they're planning to do is eliminate the old or the new version of IBR and leave the old version of IBR available, as well as create a new income plan called the Repayment Assistance Program, which we're not going to go terribly into tonight because, again, it still has to go through a lot of hoops before it becomes law. But that's why I also say there will still be some income option available to you, because this will either still be around and there could potentially be a new one for you to choose that might even be a little better than this version, but not as good as any of these other versions. So a lot to still play out there. But that's where these things stand right now. Even in the time-driven universe, so these are the more traditional repayment options, they're going to, or at least they're proposing to streamline them, right? So we've got a lot of these options on the books. They're not generally very helpful. Like nobody here should be choosing a graduated repayment plan. I really, like I mentioned in the intro, I really wouldn't recommend using a 25-year time-driven repayment option. The income-driven plans are going to give you that forgiveness credit, establish a lower minimum monthly payment, and allow you to still pay more if it makes sense for you to do so. So there's not a lot of great reasons to use these time-driven plans, right? So we don't recommend them very often, right? But they are still out there and available to use, at least for now. What is forgiveness credit? Yeah, so your federal student loans are, let's call them different, right? They're different than any debt that you're ever going to have. And one of the ways you can pay back your federal student loans is using an income-driven plan. You make payments based on your income, but it's not forever, right? They have a defined endpoint. So you have these maximum repayment periods, as I was showing there in these tables, right? So for example, if you used IBR 2014, you have 20 years to either hit a zero balance, right? Or you're going to hit 20 years and still have a balance remaining, right? At that point, whatever balance is remaining would be forgiven or canceled, right? Now you may have to pay tax on that amount that's forgiven at that time frame, but that's what ends repayment. That's why I say the secret, the federal student loan repayment, is that your balances are going to be gone one way or another, right? So you'll either earn enough, right? So the income-based repayment plan, meaning your payment based on your income would be high enough that you pay the balance to zero before you hit this time frame, or it doesn't, and you still have a balance remaining at that maximum repayment time frame, which then triggers forgiveness or cancellation, right? So that's the end point, right? And one of the reasons why I don't encourage you to pay more than your income requires you to pay, because you'll either have high enough payments to pay the balance down to zero before you hit forgiveness, or you'll hit forgiveness. All right, so how do we make sense of this, right? So we're going to start looking at our federal student loans more critically, right? So a lot of you are familiar with the direct loans already. I saw a question in there about Parent Plus loans. They're in the direct loan universe as well. Many of you have health profession student loans, or a few of you have loans for disadvantaged students. These are also a type of federal student loan, right? So knowing which loan types you have will then help us to know whether or not you should pursue something like consolidation, or which loans are eligible for something like the income-driven plans that I was just mentioning. Right now, private student loans are pretty much anything that is not on this list, right? And a number of you mentioned that you had private student loans as well. So this was the breakdown of what I saw, right? So the majority of you have federal student loans. Some of you have health profession student loans, loans for disadvantaged students. A few of you have Parent Plus loans, right? So I see a
Tony,
question.
Yeah, we've had quite a few questions about those Parent Plus loans. If you could just expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, the Parent Plus loans. So Parent Plus loans are most likely loans that your parents took to help pay for your school at some level. Not veterinary school, but probably undergrad or some kind of schooling between undergrad and veterinary school. Unless you're a parent yourself, right? If you're old enough to have children who are in college and you help to pay for their college by taking Parent Plus loans, then you'll have Parent Plus loans in addition to maybe veterinary school loans, right? So, but since most of you are new grads, my guess is that if you think you have Parent Plus loans, those are probably loans that your parents borrowed to help pay for your school. And those loans are in your parents' name. Right now, your parents may expect you to pay those back. You may have some plans to help pay those back. However, those are technically your parents' responsibility, right? You're not going to be getting bills for those loans. Your parents are going to get bills for those loans, right? So if you have your own loans from vet school and your parents have some plus loans that they took to help pay for your undergrad and you want to help pay those back, then make sure that you get your loans into the most beneficial repayment plan you can so you have some extra money in your budget to maybe help them pay down their loans, right? But again, that's not going to automatically happen. That's going to be something that you're going to have to work through with your parents because there's no mechanism for you to get the bill directly for those Parent Plus loans, right? So just something to be aware of. The studentaid.gov website is the place to start, right? So if you're not sure how to find your student aid data file, this is it, right? So studentaid.gov, this is going to be, get familiar with this, right? This is where you're going to spend some time when it comes to managing your student loans. We're going to log in here. This is where you'll also initiate your repayment options, right? So if you apply for a repayment plan, if you have to consolidate your loans, all of that lives on this studentaid.gov website. I'm going to log in here and show you where you can find that file if you haven't been able to find it. I know some of you, I've requested it a few times and I haven't seen it yet. So I'm going to assume that you have not been able to find it just yet. So we'll make that as clear as we can. All right, so it's going to log me in. Here's my dashboard. Gives me a summary of my student loan balance, right? So I've got principal, unpaid interest. My servicer is Velnet. And I'm going to hit this view details button to take me to the next screen that allows me to download my aid data file, right? So this is the file that you need. Click on this. You're going to get some boxes, some scary language will pop up in terms of, who should be using this and all that jazz. It'll want to save it as a TXT file, which is fine. That's the file you want to keep it as, right? Save that to your desktop or your computer. And then we're going to come over to the VIN Foundation Student Debt Center and put that file into the My Student Loans tool, right? So this is going to be the first tool that we use to do that physical exam on our student loans. All right, so VIN Foundation, My Student Loans tool. I would encourage you all to log in here. It'll probably ask you to log in. All of you have a VIN username and password at this point, I'm guessing. Use that to log in. It'll save your progress, and you'll also be able to more quickly get to the student debt message board area where Dr. Mears and I help provide personalized assistance for your student loans and help you build those repayment strategies. I'll come back to that later as well. But you guys are all here now or very close to here. I have graduated from veterinary school, right? So I'm going to upload some files. I've got a couple of samples here that you all submitted as part of your homework. All right, so this is somebody who's internship residency bound. Right, they're planning to use pay as you earn, pay $1,000 a month. Right, some good news with a $55,000 training income, your pay-as-you-earn payment isn't going to be anywhere near $1,000 a month, right? That's really good news, right? And if your post-training income is still going to be less than your student loan balance is now, there's not any incentive for you to pay more than you have to, right? So we're going to want to look and see which one of our repayment options we have available, what I call your IDR profile, right? So part of the student loan physical exam, looking at our principal, here's the interest that accrued while we're in school, our overall weighted average interest rate. This is how much interest we're accruing per month on our student loans, right? More than you're anticipating on paying at this point. The IDR eligibility tab is what will show you which constellation of income-driven plans you're able to use. So in this case, this borrower is eligible for ICR, pay-as-you-earn, save, which again, they technically can't apply for right now, and the new version of IBR, right? So it'll either show you that your balance is eligible for this new version of IBR or the old version. It can't be both, right? So I'd encourage everybody to grab their student aid data file right now, upload that into the My Student Loans tool, and check that IDR eligibility tab, right? This will kind of narrow down those payment options for you. So this person definitely could choose pay as you earn. It's not a bad idea as a plan to get started after graduation, right? And if they file the tax return for 2024, they can use that income to apply for that pay as you earn plan, either as part of their consolidation, if they choose to consolidate, or if they wait until their grace period ends, they can use that tax return to apply for that pay as you earn plan at that time. And then once we are looked through all of the different information on here and we're content with what we've seen, then we can send it over to the loan repayment simulator and start simulating what repayment looks like. Right, but I'm not going to do that just yet. So I'm just going to show you in here, there's some more summary information. We can see all of the different loans that we borrowed. They have different interest rates, right? This weighted average takes into account the different balances at different interest rates. And if we were to pretend that this was one loan as opposed to 20 loans, then this one loan would have an interest rate of 6.79%. That's what that's showing. It'll show all these different loan types if you want to see them. These direct subsidized loans are from undergrad, right? They typically have lower interest rates, which is great. The plus loans have higher interest rates and they accrue interest. Unsubsidized loans kind of fall in between. They still accrue interest. They have lower interest rates than the plus loans, right? But all of them are direct loans in this case, right? This person has all direct loans, right? They don't need to consolidate. Now they look like they have some loans from before vet school that have already used their grace period. So this portion of this person's loans may enter repayment in the next 30 days or so, right after graduation. So they can apply for that pay as you earn plan and it would be applied to this portion of the loans, but any of the loans that have a grace period yet to run its course, they would not have pay as you earn applied. You'd have to apply again as that grace period is expiring. Or you can consolidate all of those loans together, end the grace period, and then all of that balance will have that pay as you earn plan started as soon as that consolidation application completes. Right. So kind of coming back to that consolidation conundrum that we're going to talk about in just a few minutes here. All right, so figure out what your IDR plan profile is, and please, please ask any questions about what you're seeing when you upload your student aid file and see what that profile is for you. I'm actually going to upload another example here that I have for somebody who has health profession student loans as well. I'll show it because your health profession student loans are not found in your student aid data file. So we have to add them separately. So I'm going to show you how to do that if you have health profession student loans or loans for disadvantaged students. So I've got another example here. Somebody who's got some health profession student loans. believe it's 33,000. Yeah. So this is their direct loan portfolio, right? So they've got 18 direct loans found in that student aid file. Those health profession student loans are not in there, right? So we're going to add them using the add loans feature. So either health profession student loans, or if you have those loans for disadvantaged students, you can add them here. We know that this person's balance is 33,000. Their loan servicer will either be the school, or you might even see Heartland or ECSI is often the loan servicer for that particular type of loan, right? And when you hit save, it will incorporate those loans into the My Student Loans tool and also adjust the overall weighted average interest rate, right? So if you were to consolidate all of these loans together, your direct loans with the 6.73% weighted average interest rate with your health profession student loans at 5%, the overall portfolio would have this balance and 6.52% is the interest rate. Going through my student loan physical exam, I'm just kind of looking through those loan types again. Here, it looks like I've got some subsidized loans from undergrad as well, so I'm going to keep an eye on those if they had already used up their grace period.
Someone in the Q&A was just asking if you could regroup on that, used up the grace period already. So since you just mentioned that, would you mind to revisit that?
Yeah, so if you have loans from before vet school that had already been in repayment, then they don't get another grace period, right? They're going to re-enter repayment once they realize you're no longer in school. So when you graduate, that status gets sent to the Department of Education. It gets updated in the system. It looks for loans that haven't had a grace period, and those loans will enter their grace period. If your loans have already been through their grace period, they're going to enter repayment, right? So they will have a payment due shortly after you graduate, right? You can apply for a repayment plan for those, or if it makes sense for you to consolidate, you can use that as an opportunity to consolidate all of your loans together, and then they will all be on the same repayment plan schedule, the same clock, with the same application, right? Or you'll have to apply multiple times, right? Depending on the circumstances that you're pursuing in terms of repayment strategy and what your income is likely to look like going forward. Now let's see, this person graduated in 2025. These loans are from 2020. Maybe they haven't used their grace period yet. It's kind of hard to tell exactly in here, right? It still shows an in-school status, which implies to me that they probably went directly from undergrad into vet school, which means these loans probably haven't used their grace period yet. So these loans would then have the same grace period that the vet school loans have as well, right? So they would start that grace period after you finish veterinary school, because these loans haven't had a chance yet to have that grace period expire. Okay. All right. Let's do some prizes before we jump into the consolidation stuff. And then it'll give me a chance to kind of look through some of these questions that you guys submitted too. And then Dr. Mears, feel free to take the screen and do the wheel of names for the prize drawing.
We're actually going to have our very own Vanna White, Jordan Benshia.
Oh, nice.
I'll share my screen, but we also have Sean here. Do you want to talk to Sean first?
Sure. If you would
wait?
like to, yeah, you can go ahead. That'll give me a chance again to kind of catch up on some of these questions that are in here.
All right, Sean, you're up, and then we'll give prizes.
Yeah, special guest.
Dr. Sean Gadsden is one of our VIN Foundation board members, and he's going to join us to chat a little bit about some of our new grad resources from VIN Foundation.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. Hey, everybody. Like Jordan said, my name is Dr. Sean Gadsden. I'm one of the newer members to the VIN Foundation board, and I am actually a fairly recent graduate. I hope I can still say that, of 2021 from UC Davis. And when I joined the board, like my big interest was helping facilitate like early career success. We'll get into it a little bit more, but essentially what we found is that if new graduates can like get their feet under them and set themselves up for success and really thrive in those first 5 years of practice, then that is a good indication that you will like have a much better like long-standing career as well as we move forward. So in order to facilitate this, VIN Foundation has actually put together like a conglomeration of resources called the Thrive in 5 Toolkit. You can find it on vinfoundation.org. I went and checked out these resources when I first graduated, and I would highly, highly, highly recommend that you guys take advantage of them. And essentially, what I'll do is kind of explain each one in turn. I would say the first one that you guys are kind of here for, as far as the meat and potatoes of the meeting, is the Student Debt Center and all that information. Um, Tony and Rebecca Mears really do like an amazing job consolidating that information. We are really, really fortunate to have them because there are a lot of students who like don't get access to this information, or like fail to utilize the tools that them and VIN Foundation provide. And man, I can't tell you, if I had not utilized them and those resources, my own student loans would probably I'd be in a lot rougher shape. I definitely took some great advice that really helped me not only like get a better sense of what's going on, but really develop a plan. Because I think a lot of students, when you get to loan balances like a lot of us have, like 200, 300, 400 plus $1,000, I think we lose the perspective and it all just becomes like a lot of money, which is very true, but you really want to plan. And the Student Debt Center and their resources can be incredibly helpful. So I would check that out. The next one that I would definitely highly recommend, especially if you're a little like ER minded post graduation, will be the ER Where You Are series, getting through the day and night. Essentially, what this is a series of courses you can sign up for, which is actually free for recent graduates, and it takes you through how to effectively manage in a very like non-textbook, like real life way, a lot of the kind of cases you can see on the shift. And essentially it's split up into cases you see like a GP would see, and then swing kind of becomes the more like urgent care type cases, and then the night series is a lot of the ICU type stuff. So and everything is in there, from managing congestive heart failure to pericardial effusion. If you're anything like me and you were terrified of your first GDV, that is a great resource. They really lay it out in a very like understandable, easily digestible way. And the notes that I have taken as I've gone through those resources when I was early career leaving, I still use in clinical practice all the time. So the ER Where You Are, the Thrive in 5, or the ER Where You Are, getting through the day and night within the Thrive in 5 toolkit, is incredibly helpful. So I would highly recommend you use it. I would say something else that's in there that I think a lot of us probably wouldn't think about, but is really important, is the model employment contract, especially as you get closer and closer to graduation. I mean, some of you at this point may have already be like getting offers and like all these exciting things that you're trying to like get the next steps together. But I would highly recommend going through the model employment contract. Essentially, what it is a very detailed and outlined like template of what a good contract could look like, some of the things that may or may not be in a contract that you're given. And we actually have both students and employers like utilize it. And really the hope is that you and a potential employer will sit down, go through the contract, really understand everything that's in it, talk about things you do want in there, don't want in there. It can help facilitate the discussion. So that way you really understand like what you're signing up for and some of the long-term agreements, their responsibilities versus your responsibilities. And I know understandably so, especially in a student debt talk, like I think we focus a lot on like, okay, but how much money am I going to make? Because I got this mega student loan balance hanging over me. But there are plenty of other things like your benefits and your schedule and, when should I take cases all day? When can I stop receiving and work on records for the end of my shift, that really play into your quality of life? So I would just really very much encourage you to like think about those things as well and make absolutely sure that, you go through the employment contract, and that can help definitely facilitate those things. next up, second to last, but certainly like highly, highly important, is going to be the Vets for Vets group. Essentially, what this is, the idea was veterinarians or veterinary professionals supporting like veterinary professionals in a way that only our peers could really like understand. Essentially, what you would do is go to vinfoundation.org and say that you can click on the Vets for Vets tab and you fill out like a short form if you're looking for peer-to-peer support. And there'll be some questions about like what kind of support you're looking for. All of that data is not like shared anywhere. It is completely kept in-house. Like, that is not like utilized or taken anywhere else. But the reason we ask those questions so we can match you up with a group that is like, we feel is best able to help you with whatever you're looking for. And we have all kinds of subgroups within Vets for Vets that really get specific. So we have one like Vets in Recovery, which is for veterinarians, supporting other veterinarians that may be struggling with addiction, or neurodivergent vets dealing with, cancer, all kinds of things. And I cannot speak highly enough about the people who like moderate those groups and help those people find those sources of community, because it really does make a huge, huge difference. And I think especially in our profession, we have such a unique group of like stressors and unique challenges. I've definitely started my own like outside therapy journey, and it can be really hard to find like a group of people, especially away from school, that really understand those things. So I would, if you ever feel like you're looking for that support, please think of the VIN Foundation. It is an amazing resource. And Vets for Vets would be like absolutely happy to help you with that. We want to make 100% sure that you have everything you need to succeed, to succeed in these first few years. And then the very last one that I'm going to make a little extra pitch for, because I'm on the council that helps update this, is the new graduate survival manual. Essentially what this is right now it's like a series of pages on the website that kind of walk through what are some unique like challenges you may face as a new grad, how to think about those things, how to overcome them, about like fitting in and establishing a good culture, and how do you get clients to believe that you're competent and give you a source, how do you come off as knowledgeable but respectful, and like all of these things as well, just things that aren't necessarily covered in other places that really help as far as the transition from becoming like a vet student, and then some of the differences and challenges you'll face as you then transition into being like a fully fledged like veterinarian. We are actually in the middle of updating the new grad survival manual. We're expanding a lot of the content in it, and adding a couple sections, especially as it comes to some of the talking to bosses and client relationships and all these other things as well. So there will be updates to that coming down the pipeline. But even with the version that's on the website now, it is a treasure trove of information that I would highly recommend you utilize. So those are the big five, right? Model employment contract, new grad survival manual, ER where you are, student debt center, and then Vets for Vets. 5 resources in the Thrive in 5 toolkit. Please, please, please take some time, go through those. I promise you they are very, very helpful. And our real goal is to set you up for success. And if you have any questions about any of those resources, please feel free to reach out to us. We want to support you guys as best we can. Okay? All right. That's it. I'm done
Thank you,
rambling.
Sean. Great job.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr.
Yeah,
Gatson.
no
I'm
problem.
guessing many of you or some of you will probably meet Dr. Gatson. He's an ER practitioner at VEG. So some of you new ER doctors may run into him very soon here. It's a pretty small
Yeah.
profession. It's amazing how often we run into each other. So,
Oh yeah. Honestly, it's great though. I
yeah.
love getting to see people I know from several years ago just randomly at a conference, a couple times. All right. Thanks, you
And
guys.
all of those things, thanks so much, Dr. Gatson. All of those things are free. So everything the VIN Foundation offers is completely free. No VIN membership is needed, although you do have access to VIN, some of the areas on VIN, specifically the VIN Foundation ones, with VIN Foundation access, but also as a student, you do have access to VIN. So we are going to do a wheel of names. I'm going to say that we start with one of the $100 DoorDash gift cards, because we know those are super popular, and then do one of the Yetis. So let's go for it.
Are you sharing the Wheel of Names?
Yeah, are you not seeing it?
I'm not seeing it.
Okay.
There's Zoom is weird now, and there's multiple shares. I was seeing Jordan's screen. Share it again.
We'll see it again. Do you see it now?
I do see it.
Okay, great. Well,
Okay, Nestor M. That is $100 DoorDash gift card.
awesome.
So start with that. Okay. We're going to do one for a Yeti mug now.
Do we know what school Nestor is from?
We could look.
Okay, sorry, I didn't.
We just don't have that info here on. Oh, Prima N. You have won a VIN Foundation Yeti mug. Do you want to do more or just stop there, Tony?
Let's stop there for now, and then we'll
Okay.
do some more.
Sounds
we'll do
good.
some more.
I'm going to stop
student
sharing
stuff.
now.
Okay.
May the force be with you to share.
And hopefully somebody can confirm that they're seeing my screen now, or tell me.
I do, in fact, see your screen, Tony.
Okay, excellent, great. Thank you, Daniela. Thank you. All right, great. So I did see some great questions come in here too. And some of this hopefully we'll touch on as we get into the consolidation stuff. But can you elaborate more on why making payments during the grace period is not a good idea? So generally speaking, as you're getting started, graduating, moving to wherever you're going to go next, getting to that first paycheck, building and updating your budget, there are way better things that you can do with your money than paying your loans during that grace period, right? And it kind of comes back to, again, what's your student debt to income ratio? Are you likely to hit forgiveness? Generally speaking, again, if your debt to income ratio is greater than 1, depending on how your career path pans out, there's a chance that you could reach forgiveness, whether that's income-driven repayment forgiveness or public service loan forgiveness, depending on the organization that you end up working with over the years, right? So making payments towards your student loans when they ultimately could get forgiven is not a very good use of your money, right? Also, there are about 100 other things between now and the end of this year that you could be doing, boosting your emergency fund, saving for retirement, saving for the down payment on a home, saving, starting an opportunity fund if you have, plans on buying into a practice or starting your own. Those are things that, rather than paying towards your student loans when no payment is due, that you may want to take the opportunity to do those instead, right? So again, the grace period was put in place to kind of give you that buffer from getting to graduation to something that helps you know what your post-graduation life is going to look like, including your finances around that, right? So I wouldn't recommend using those limited funds that you have available between graduation and maybe that first paycheck to make payments when no payments are due. Right, and that specifically applies to bonuses and things, right? So a lot of you indicated that you received signing bonuses. Please don't use those monies to pay towards your student loans during the grace period, right? There's probably some strings attached to those sign-on bonuses. So it's not technically all your money free and clear yet anyway, and you don't want to necessarily use that to put towards your student loans if you may have to end up paying that back depending on how things go over this next 6 months, year, 2 years after graduation, right? So give yourself some time and breathing room to get settled in that new position before you start making extra payments towards your student loans, particularly when none are due. Regarding the tax returns, an anonymous attendee asked, for tax return documents my spouse and I filed together, will their income be part of the income-driven repayment plan? Yes, if you filed your most recent tax return jointly with your spouse, then your spouse's income will count in that calculation for your monthly student loan payment. If you filed your taxes separately from your spouse, or you're not yet married, right, then it will only be based on your income. Right, but if your most recent tax return was filed jointly, then either the joint income that's on that tax return can be used, or they'll request income from both you and your spouse to calculate the monthly payment on your student loans. All right, so I think those questions I felt overlapped with some of the stuff we're going to talk about when it comes to consolidation. Glenn, I see your question too in there about when to apply. That's kind of related to consolidation, so we'll tackle that here too. So these are the areas where I think you really should consider a consolidation. So non-direct loans, right? I think I saw somebody in the chat or in the question area ask something about indirect loans. So there are no indirect loans, right? Direct loans is the name of the federal student loan program. You get the loans directly from the Department of Education, i.e. the government, hence the name direct loans. I guess you could, I mean, I'm calling them non-direct loans, but anything that's not a direct loan, you could call an indirect loan, but you're not going to find that terminology anywhere, right? So direct loans, direct unsubsidized loans, direct subsidized loans, direct grad plus loans are all direct type loans, right? Those loans are already eligible for income-driven repayment, public service loan forgiveness. You don't necessarily have to do anything to make them eligible. Health profession student loans, loans for disadvantaged students, if you still have some Perkins loans floating around, or maybe you're a career changer that has had a pretty significant gap between borrowing and now vet school, you might have some older school federal family education loans, previously known as FFELS, floating around in your student aid file, right? But those are all non-direct loans, right? So these would have to be consolidated. They are federal loans, right? So they are eligible to be consolidated, right? Unlike a private loans are not eligible to be consolidated using a direct consolidation loan. So all of these health profession student loans, particularly loans for disadvantaged students, those are loans that you may want to consider consolidating so you can make them eligible for something like an income-driven plan or public service loan forgiveness. By themselves, they are not. Right, health profession student loans, loans for disadvantaged students, they can only be paid back under a 10-year repayment plan. Right, so you would have a separate monthly payment for those loans than you would for any direct loans that you also have. So consolidating and making them a direct loan, a direct consolidation loan, would make them eligible and have them covered under any payment that you have calculated based on your income, like an income-driven plan payment, or if you're using one of the other standard extended graduated plan payments, right? So that would be a reason why you would want to consider consolidating. Now you can consolidate just those health profession student loans if you want to, and not consolidate everything, right? But then we have to consider when and why we might do that, right? And there are certain instances where you might consider doing that. This is probably the biggest one, right? And we covered this a lot during the debt repayment challenge area on the message boards. This seemed to come up really frequently, right? So people that are graduating, starting some kind of academic program like a PhD or going directly into a residency, right? Particularly at an academic institution, you're probably going to be enrolled in school again as part of that program. So whether it's an MPH or a PhD or a combination of those, or maybe directly into an academic residency, which seems to be more frequently happening these days, if you enroll in one of those programs before your grace period ends for your veterinary school loans, they will automatically re-enter that in-school deferment, the same in-school deferment that many of your loans are in now, if you haven't technically graduated yet. Right? And you can't get your loans out of that status, right? Not until you finish those programs, right? So consolidation presents a unique opportunity if you have, a few months, let's say you graduated this week, maybe it's next week, the week after, and you don't start that program until this fall or August, mid-August, when we technically start school again, usually. You have a couple of months there to get that consolidation loan submitted, which allows you to end your grace period, get those loans into a repayment status, and they can have a payment that's calculated from your income, which will probably be very low, or be eligible for forgiveness credit, right? Start that clock ticking towards forgiveness rather than just being stuck in an in-school status, racking up more interest, and then you're starting that whole process after you finish that program. Right.
Tony, while we're touching on that, that grace period. There's a question in the Q&A about grad plus loans and that 6-month period after graduation. If you could just kind of touch on how that works as well.
Yeah, I've got some more information on that in just a few. So the grad plus loans, they have a 6-month grace period as well, but they don't experience the same issue, right? So let me come back to the grad plus loans, right? But if in just a few, but if you're heading for one of these programs, I would highly recommend that you try to get those loans, all of your loans, consolidated to avoid them getting stuck in that in-school deferment status for the duration of that program, right? And the PhD ones are particularly problematic because they tend to be so long, right? So that's a big one there. Public service loan forgiveness, if you're starting, say, an academic internship or an academic residency, or you see yourself hitting public service loan forgiveness, maybe you're going to start working for a shelter, next month, right? And you know that would be eligible for public service loan forgiveness. Your grace period time is not public service loan forgiveness eligible, right? You have to get those loans out of the grace period in order for any payments to be considered public service loan forgiveness eligible. And the only way to do that is through the consolidation application, right? So you apply for the direct consolidation loan, end the grace period early, and then you can get a minimum monthly payment, maybe even a minimum monthly payment of 0 if you have a low tax return on file. Those $0 quote payments will be considered public service loan forgiveness eligible as soon as you start repayment and that job that's eligible. Classic example, academic internships. Graduate right around now, you start your internship mid-June, right? If you take this opportunity to consolidate your loans, end the grace period, then once you start your academic internship, you can have that time count towards public service loan forgiveness. Right? If you don't do that, then even though you might be in a public service loan forgiveness eligible position, like an academic internship, the qualifying time won't start until November, December after your grace period ends for those loans. Right? So another one of those reasons why you might consider consolidating. All right, we'll get to the grad plus thing in just a minute, I promise. Pros and cons of consolidating. Ending that grace period early, right? This is a huge amount of confusion. This time frame in your career when it comes to student loans is what to do with the grace period, right? And people try a whole bunch of things, and some of them involve consolidation, others of them don't. Some of them just try to make payments towards their loans, thinking that they're going to qualify for income-driven repayment or public service loan forgiveness, even though they're in the grace period. Unfortunately, they won't. It's just one of the silly quirks of the federal student loan system. A lot of people avoid consolidation because they don't want to mix all of their interest rates together. It's a weighted average. So mathematically, you're getting charged the same amount of interest, whether you consolidate or not, right? So a weighted average interest rate accounts for the different interest rates, the different principal balances you have, right? So it's not going to materially impact the amount of interest that you pay or are charged each month, whether you consolidate or don't consolidate. Start that forgiveness clock sooner. It's particularly relevant if you're going to end up reaching forgiveness or public service loan forgiveness. The cons of consolidation, capitalization, right? So what's capitalization? They take the unpaid interest that accrued during school and they add it to your principal, right? So if we come back to one of our examples here, this person has $28,000 of unpaid interest. If they let the grace period expire naturally, let's say, so after the 6 months post-graduation period, this interest will not get added to the principal. However, if you consolidate it, this interest does get added to the principal. The way your student loans work, you don't get charged any additional interest on your interest. You do get charged interest on the principal, right? So the higher the principal balance, the more interest you get charged, right? So now we've got this disincentive to consolidate, right? Which is why this is such a conundrum, particularly this year, right? In prior years, we had access to plans that allowed us to, income-driven plans that didn't charge us interest, so it didn't really matter. And previously, your unpaid interest would get added to your principal, i.e. capitalize, whether you consolidate it or not, right? And now we have this divergence as part of some of the changes that were made and stuck for the student loan system. Consolidation capitalizes your unpaid interest, letting your grace period expire does not. Right? So when it makes sense to consolidate, like in those instances that I mentioned previously, I'm still going to take the capitalization hit, right? Because the additional forgiveness time will outweigh that, right? But if I don't necessarily have to consolidate, right, I'm going to let the grace period expire so I can avoid the unpaid interest capitalization. Probably a bigger deal when you have a higher balance, right? The higher your balance, the more unpaid interest you're going to have. The more likely it is you're going to reach forgiveness, particularly public service loan forgiveness. It doesn't really matter if your unpaid interest gets capitalized, right? Because it's going to get canceled anyway, right? So the sooner you can get to that forgiveness event, the better. Consolidation can help there, right? So this is that what I'm calling the consolidation conundrum, which is particularly challenging this year. Oh, it looks like my presentation reset there. So let me dive back in here. All right, so how do you start a consolidation loan? Your loans have to be in the grace period, or specifically, the direct unsubsidized loans have to be in a grace period, right? They're the ones that can get left out of the consolidation if they're not officially in their grace period status. Your Grad Plus loans don't technically have an official grace period. They have what's called a post-graduation 6-month deferment, right, which makes them automatically eligible for repayment or consolidation. You don't have to wait for them to do anything, right? So they technically have the same grace period that your unsubsidized loans do, but the difference you'll notice is if and when you try to consolidate your loans. The direct unsubsidized loans have to be in the grace period, the official grace period status, in order for them to be eligible to be included in the consolidation. Right? So if you start the consolidation application too soon, you can end up seeing your direct Grad Plus loans consolidated and these left out, which is what we have seen. We see that on the boards for new grads not infrequently, and it's kind of a mess. Right. So it kind of comes back to the question that Dr. Mears brought out into the room. You know, do the Grad Plus loans have a grace period? They do, right? They do have that 6-month post-graduation deferment that acts just like the direct unsubsidized grace period, but it doesn't prevent the Grad Plus loans from being included in the consolidation. Right? The direct unsubsidized loans actually have to officially be in the grace period in order for them to be eligible. So you have to be a little bit careful. We want you to, if you're going to consolidate, we want you to start that as soon as you can after graduation. I say as soon as your loans allow. And what I mean by that is your direct unsubsidized loans have to officially be in that grace period. And you'll see that happen. It'll trigger usually within days after you graduate, but sometimes it can take a stubborn amount of time. You know, usually not more than 30 days. For some of you that might graduate from a foreign AVMA accredited school, I've seen it take longer than 30 days, right? So it for some, I don't know why the system is delayed for some loans more than others, but it can happen. So grab that student aid data file, upload it into the VIN Foundation My Student Loans tool, and you'll see when that status changes. But you'll also, when you go through the consolidation application, you'll see the loans that are included and ones that are not. Right? But for those of you that have lots of loans, it's sometimes difficult to know which ones that get kicked out of the consolidation and which ones get included. So you'll just have to review that information carefully through that process. Health profession student loans, loans for disadvantaged students have that same grace period problem, right? They typically will get left out of consolidations because they can take an annoying amount of time to officially enter their grace period. Right, so usually 30 days after you graduate should be enough time to have to wait, right? But sometimes it can take a little bit longer. you also have to manually add those health profession student loans to the consolidation application, right? And this is the image that I'm showing here, right? So on the consolidation application, this is how you add loans, and it will allow you to add health profession student loans using this dropdown. You can either add, each loan individually, you can add that total amount, right? Hopefully you'll have an account number that you can add for those health profession student loans. But this is how you can get those loans into a consolidation that are otherwise not found in your student aid file. So those health profession student loans, loans for disadvantaged students, right? These other loans that are on this list should automatically populate, right? But for some reason, if the system didn't find it in the electronic application, you could add them manually. This is just one of those silly quirks of the student loan system, and it's particularly relevant in this graduation timeframe, right? Because we have some people that either start the consolidation loan too soon. You can see loans excluded, right? Not your intention maybe, but it just how the system reacts, right? Because the status of the loan isn't necessarily in the right position to allow it to be included. You do have 180 days to add loans to a consolidation if something got excluded, right? But this is complicated. It's messy. You have to do it via paper, right? It's great if you have to and you want to take advantage of it, but it's just more work, right? So if you can wait for those loans to officially enter their grace period, it'll be easier to get them into the consolidation, and it'll be an easier process one time rather than having to do it multiple times. All right, this was, I thought, a great, some of you like to wax poetic in the primary concerns and things that you submit for the sessions, but I think it does a good job of illustrating how this works, right? So this is somebody that's starting an internship, probably going to do a second internship, then followed by a residency. Ultimately would like to get some public service loan forgiveness credit, right? Not going to get any public service loan forgiveness for the non-academic internship. The private practice internship is probably not going to be eligible unless it's with like AMC or Angel, which are 501c3s. But you can't get your loans to qualify for public service loan forgiveness until they're out of the grace period, right? If you're doing a private practice internship, not at a nonprofit, then it doesn't necessarily matter if you get the loans consolidated and out of the grace period immediately, right? Because you're not going to get any public service loan forgiveness credit for that anyway, right? So you could apply for the income-driven plan as that grace period is expiring, as opposed to consolidating. However, they also know they have some loans from undergrad that have already used up their grace period, right? So that means that they'll either have to apply for an income-driven plan for that portion of their loans, or they could use that as an opportunity to consolidate all of their loans and get them on the same repayment schedule. Right, so applying for one, when your loans are due to enter repayment, apply for a repayment plan, right? Like you would after your loans are exiting their grace period, or consolidate them, right? Don't ignore them, right? You can request a deferment. Oftentimes they'll grant you a deferment on those loans until that grace period on your veterinary school loans expires. But I generally wouldn't recommend doing that. I would prefer to get, at least into an income-driven plan with a $0 monthly payment, so I can start getting some forgiveness credit on at least some portion of my loans, right? So apply for an income-driven plan if you have to. Consolidate your loans if it makes sense for you to do so, but don't ignore the statements, right? So if you've got older loans that have already been through their grace period, you may see some statements start showing up in your email box, in your mailbox, right? Even though your vet school loans are still in a grace period. What if I don't want to end my grace period early, but I need to consolidate my health profession student loans? Yeah, so that's a great question, right? When should you do that, right? Because the health profession student loan has a 12-month grace period. Your veterinary school loans have a 6-month grace period. If you kind of want them to be on the same clock, you can submit the consolidation about 30 or 60 days before your grace period ends, right? Or you could let the health profession student loan 12-month grace period expire and then consolidate them, right? But then they're going to be off by about 6 months in terms of qualifying income-driven plan or public service loan forgiveness qualifying payments, right? So it depends on how complicated you want it to be, right? If you want to take full advantage of the health profession student loan balance and the grace period, the longer grace period, right? Then don't consolidate them until that 12-month grace period ends. If you have a relatively low balance and you're doing internship and residency, but you still have some direct loans, you may want to leave those health profession student loans outside of a consolidation so they have that advanced training, the internship residency deferment, and they don't accrue any interest. Right. And then presuming you're going to pay your balance zero before hitting any kind of forgiveness after you complete your training, you can then start making the 10-year payments on those health profession loans at that time, or you can think about consolidating them later after you finish that training as well. Right. This is the part of the 2025 grad class aspect of repayment that is completely nonsensical, right? Trying to figure out exactly how to navigate this as efficiently as possible can drive you crazy, right? So if you want to keep everything simple, right, the consolidation loan can do that, but it will come with the capitalization, but you just have to do everything once. If you want to try to maximize everything, it gets more complicated, right? And let's be honest, right? If you're heading for an internship, residency, even in private practice, 6 months from now, you're probably going to be buried doing veterinary stuff, right? So try to figure out how to piece all of that together the further you get removed from either this session or, caring exactly how you're going to get through this. That's when mistakes are going to happen. So if you want to keep everything just as simple as possible, it's not a terrible idea to consolidate your loans as soon as the loans allow, right? Just to keep things simple, right? So those are the options that are on the table. I know that they're not clear, and I can't give you one pathway without looking at all of your different components of your loans, what you're doing, what you hope to accomplish with your student loans. If you would like that assistance, that's where the student debt message board areas are really helpful. And a lot of you that submitted your Signalman forms are kind of in the queue to have that happen. But those are the discussions we're having on the boards right now, is how to navigate consolidation given your specific circumstances. Hopefully that doesn't send you running and screaming. I mean, it makes me want to tear my hair out every time I even talk about it, right? Because this is the tragedy of losing the SAVE plan, right? The SAVE plan was so helpful in terms of just letting everybody graduate, consolidate, apply for SAVE. Nobody was accruing interest for the first 12 months. It didn't really matter. You didn't have to play these compare contrast games. And now that SAVE is gone, it has opened up this whole can of worms that, depending on how complicated your portfolio is and where you're headed after graduation, it just makes it really, really messy. So, deep breath, ask a lot of questions, and we can help you, navigate some of that as you work your way into repayment.
I think it would be a great time to check in on some prizes.
Yeah, please do.
Alrighty, let's do it. Okay, Becca, you should see my screen.
I do.
Okay. We're winning over here. All right, let's do a Yeti mug and a Rumple, and then that will leave one more Is that right? One more?
No,
or
two more
Two
DoorDash
more.
cards.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's do a DoorDash and a Yeti, and then we'll leave the Rumple and a DoorDash for last.
Big money.
DoorDash $100. Food, 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 food. Heather K. All right. Heather K, you have won a $100 DoorDash gift card.
Excellent.
All right, now our last Yeti. Nikki P.
Nikki P.
All right, Nikki P, you have won a VIN Foundation Yeti mug. Those are pretty much indestructible if you were listening to our podcast recently. All right, we will turn it back and then we will leave the final $100 DoorDash gift card and the VIN Foundation Rumple blanket for last.
All righty.
Tony, would you be able to show in the My Student Loans tool and discuss how to check and see if your loans are ready for consolidation? Can you show where that grace period status would be seen on My Student Loans?
I can. I wish I would have thought to bring one. Do you guys see my screen again?
Yes.
Okay, great. I don't think I have one that shows grace period yet for one of you. But I'll show you where it will show up. So when what you're looking for, again, particularly, this is the My Student Loans tool. So this is one of the other examples we've been working from. So I'm going to go to the Loan Types tab. I'm going to look for those direct Stafford unsubsidized loans in that Loan Types tab. And I'm looking at the repayment plan. Right now I can see that these are listed as in school. Right, they will actually show grace period. Right, so when that status changes from in school to grace period, it will show grace period here. Right, now some of these will show a repayment plan status. Now these are some older loans, right? I see a gap in this person's borrowing timeline, which suggests to me that these older loans from maybe undergrad or whatever they were doing before vet school have already exhausted that grace period, which means they were probably in a repayment plan, probably the standard 10-year plan. They got switched automatically into an in-school deferment when they went back into vet school. These are the loans that will re-enter repayment at that standard 10-year plan rate 30 days after you graduate, or once that Department of Education recognizes you're no longer in school. Right, but so you want to keep checking those student aid files to look for your vet school loans to show grace period for those unsubsidized loans. The Grad Plus loans are not going to say grace period, right? So they're going to either show a repayment plan or they're going to say deferment. Either way, they're eligible to be included in a consolidation, or they could be, you could theoretically apply for repayment for them. Right, so they don't ever get held up, right? They're not holding up anything that you want to do with your student loans. But the ones that are from vet school, which all of these look to be, will have that 6-month post-graduation. It's not technically a grace period, but it acts just like it, right? So no payment will be due. But if you do something with those loans, you may see them enter repayment as well. All right. Let me come back to the Q&A panel. I saw some other questions I wanted to snag. Oh, this is a good one. So here, I will be doing an internship residency after graduation. I have heard some mention of medical residency forbearance. Can you talk a little bit about advice for entering an income-based plan versus this medical residency forbearance during those 4+ years? Yeah, that's this applies to here, right? Please don't use that, right? Now I need to get rid of the save thing here. That's not accurate anymore. But if you're heading into an internship or residency, the best place for your loans to be are an income-driven plan payment. Again, coming back to that concept that, that none of that time counts towards forgiveness. And you won't know whether or not you need forgiveness or could receive forgiveness or not down the road, right? If you put your loans into a quote medical forbearance, which is essentially deferment, it's just going to rack up a bunch of interest, right? You won't have a payment due, right? But that interest will get added to your principal. It'll trigger that capitalization, which means you'll pay more after that forbearance period, right? So I wouldn't recommend that. I would apply for the income-driven plan, right? And if you've got a tax return on file, it probably shows a pretty low number from your last year of vet school. It'll show a really low number when you file your taxes for 2025, which means your payments will be very, very low, if not zero, for at least those first 2 years. And then maybe, depending on when you get to that third year, depending on what your resident income is, you may trigger a small payment, right? But it's worth continuing to make that small payment to get that forgiveness credit and prevent that interest from capitalizing after you finish that so-called medical forbearance, right? So I would not recommend using a forbearance or deferment during your residency training, internship or residency training. All right. So another good question here: what advice do you have for vets who went back to school to get an MPH and are now graduating with additional loans? The vet school loans are already consolidated, but not the MPH loans. Yeah, so that's a tough one. It depends on particularly how much forgiveness time you might have on those older loans. We had a period where you could consolidate your loans and any of the prior forgiveness time would count towards the new consolidation loan. But we are no longer in that time frame, which means one of the other side effects, I think I had that added in the cons list, it will restart your forgiveness progress, right? So you have to be very careful in that scenario where maybe you had some forgiveness credit built up on your loans. You went back to school to get an MPH, took out some more loans, right? You're going to want to keep those separate from your prior loans that have some forgiveness credit, meaning you don't want to end up consolidating them all together. When you go to studentaid.gov and you go to start a consolidation, it will automatically pull in all of the loans it finds, right? This is where you want to be very judicious about going through the loans that are in the consolidation, right? Add the ones that might be missing, but subtract out ones that you don't want to get consolidated, like loans that might have some previous forgiveness qualifying time, particularly public service loan forgiveness time. You don't want to reset that. And if we're talking about a master's of public health, there's a good chance that you're probably going to end up in a position, or already are in a position, where you could earn public service loan forgiveness, right? So that MPH loan that you took out, you can consolidate it after you finish that program to end its grace period, so it can start earning public service loan forgiveness credit sooner, right? But you have to make sure you don't include the other ones that might have its own separate amount of public service loan forgiveness credit. Another way to check that, so in your My Student Loans tool, particularly for those of you that might be in that situation, or once you start to earn public service loan forgiveness credit, you'll see that in your file, right? So there was actually one, let me see if I have, there was a person who submitted their signalment form as just graduating, and they're going to be working towards public service loan forgiveness. They indicated in their form that they thought that they had 4 years of public service loan forgiveness credit. Now they may, right? But it's not in the file, which means the Department of Education doesn't see it yet either, right? So when you start working for a public service loan forgiveness eligible employer, you want to submit a public service loan forgiveness employment certification form. That's what indicates to them that you want to start logging your PSLF time, right? And they'll review your loans, They'll make sure they're in the right repayment plan status, that you're working for a qualifying employer and you're meeting all of the other requirements. And once they acknowledge that, then they'll start logging public service loan forgiveness credit on there. So if you have loans that have public service loan forgiveness credit, like in the case of the person who asked the question about, I went back to school to get an MPH, check your student aid data file, upload it here, look for the public service loan forgiveness credit. If you have some loans that have credit and other loans that do not, like the newer loans, you don't want to consolidate those loans together because it will reset everything to zero. Hopefully that makes sense. All right. When specifically would you not want to consolidate? If I had all direct loans, so I didn't have any health profession student loans, I didn't have any other loans that were eligible to be consolidated, included in an income-driven plan. If I thought my student debt to income ratio would be 1 or less than 1, and that I'm going to pay my loans off before I hit zero, before I hit forgiveness, then there's probably not a great reason for you to consolidate. If I have all direct loans, and even if I am projected to hit forgiveness, but I don't want my unpaid interest to capitalize because maybe I have, like in this case, I've got, $20,000 of unpaid interest, right? I don't want to see that get added to my principal, right? And this person has nothing but direct loans, right? If I didn't have any urgency to start earning public service loan forgiveness credit, right, then I might just let the grace period expire and start earning that forgiveness credit after the grace period expires. Now, this person is starting a shelter practice job soon, right? That's a tough one, right? I mean, to me, like, only you're going to know this, right? I mean, if you're kind of a nonprofit lifer, right? A lot of veterinarians are, right? You can't see yourself doing anything other than working for a nonprofit in some way, shape, or form, and you want to start earning that public service loan forgiveness credit, then it still may be worth consolidating to capitalize that interest and start earning that public service loan forgiveness credit sooner. Right? But it also wouldn't be wrong to not, just recognizing that you're postponing that eventual public service loan forgiveness by about 6 months. Right? You need 120 monthly qualifying payments to be eligible for public service loan forgiveness. Right? Again, if you're one of those people that knows that you're probably not going to do anything but work for a nonprofit, do you need that 6 months sooner rather than later? It's up to you, right? But to get it, you're going to result in capitalizing your interest. If you inevitably end up hitting public service loan forgiveness, financially, it doesn't matter, right? There will be no financial consequences to that capitalization. The consequences will come if you move away from public service loan forgiveness, right? So some of us need a crystal ball to figure that out, right? There's no wrong way to do it here. There's just kind of pros and cons, right? So you weigh the pros and cons and you make the best decision you can based on your, best guess of how things are going to unfold for your career. Does PhD count towards public service loan forgiveness if you're getting a stipend? Probably not. Right? You can try, right? I would still submit the form, right? And it's going to require you to have somebody sign off on that. And if they sign off that you meet the employment requirements, then you'll get the credit. But generally speaking, we've seen people who are doing PhDs and receiving a stipend not receive public service loan forgiveness credit. However, you still can receive income-driven repayment plan forgiveness credit, right? And if your PhD is a long time, right, I'm going to want to have that credit accruing as well, so I can get to the end of repayment sooner rather than later, right? It might not be public service loan forgiveness, but it might end up being income-driven repayment plan forgiveness. All right, let's see, where am I? So here, let's look at some guidelines, right? So some income-driven repayment plan guidelines. My debt to income ratio, if it's starting at 1 or less than 1, right, I'm probably going to pay my loans off before I hit forgiveness. Right? I may not even reach public service loan forgiveness. Right? There's another thing that I see confusion on, right? So there's some people that posted in the debt repayment prep challenge who have, 30, 40, 50, $60,000 of student debt and are hoping to get public service loan forgiveness. That's probably not going to happen, right? When you have a debt to income ratio that's less than 1, the payment that you're going to make towards your student loans is going to be the equivalent of maybe a standard 10-year plan payment or maybe even higher, which means you're going to pay the balance off before you hit public service loan forgiveness, right? Not a bad thing, right? It just means that you're probably not going to hit public service loan forgiveness. So I wouldn't be overly concerned about how do I get there. You could still, you can still rack up the credit, but chances are you're going to pay the balance to 0 before you actually hit public service loan forgiveness. If your starting debt to income ratio is going to be greater than 2 as you're getting started, you're probably going to hit forgiveness, right? Even with all of the changes that we've been seeing in the income-driven repayment system, you're probably still going to hit forgiveness, right? So I'm going to pay the minimum using the most beneficial plan that I have available to me and plan for that potential tax down the road, and then reassess each year as I file my taxes, because that's probably what I'm going to use to update that income information each year and make sure that I'm still on the right path. I want to think about when my debt to income ratio might be less than 1, right? And how long is that going to take? Right? If it doesn't happen within the first few years after you graduate, you're probably going to hit forgiveness, right? Even for those of you that are on a internship, residency, specialty track, right? That 4 years, 5 years of additional training can make it such that you're likely going to reach forgiveness, even using an income-driven plan, even if your income significantly increases after your training. Right, so just be aware of that. Those are things that will start to run in the student loan repayment simulator to get a better idea of. Oh, let me do that. Let me get. Well, we're going to hit that in just a second. The student loan repayment simulator. All right, so choosing that repayment plan, whether that's via consolidation or you're going to bypass the consolidation process, right? I'm going to use studentaid.gov. Right, studentaid.gov is where you go to apply for those plans directly. If it's going to income-driven repayment plan, studentaid.gov/IDR, it's going to look like this. These are the plans that are available, right? So IBR, ICR, pay as you earn. Direct consolidation loan, you'll start via the direct consolidation application. And if you indicate as part of that application that you would like to use an income-driven plan, then it kind of kicks you over into the income-driven plan application automatically. If you don't do either of those, after your grace period expires, you'll get pushed into that standard 10-year plan payment by default. If you want to select a different time-driven plan, you can do that via the consolidation application, or you have to call your servicer and ask them to put your loans into a different time-driven option. There's no electronic application for the time-driven plans outside of the automatic standard 10-year plan that your loans are put into if you don't choose anything. Here are the income questions. This is why it's so important to have your tax return available, right? If you apply for an income-driven plan, it's going to ask you directly, did you file for your taxes in either of the last 2 years? Yes or no, right? And then it's going to ask you again, do you currently have taxable income? Right? So here's your get out of jail free card, right? If you don't have a tax return on file and you still would like to try to get a $0 payment on your student loans, you can apply before you start your job and start earning income and select the option that says, no, I do not have taxable income. But in order for you to do that, if you're starting your job before your grace period expires, you would have to consolidate the loans. Otherwise, you won't be eligible to do this. Right, so kind of coming back to the timing things, timing components. Do you need to consolidate? Do you need to get that $0 payment? Would it be really helpful for you? I don't have a tax return. I can use the consolidation application as long as I submit it before I start my job and I have any taxable income to declare. Right? If none of those things are true, then I have to upload one of these sources of information that are no longer or no more than 90 days old. Right? So now I'm using my pay stub, most likely, for my job after graduation to apply for something like an income-driven plan. With that tax return on file, you don't have to worry. Again, they'll always take that, even if it's more than 90 days old, right? They'll always take that tax return, which is why it still makes a lot of sense to try to file that tax return even now, if you'd like to have that opportunity to have a very low payment when you apply for your repayment plan. Okay, why don't we do some more, the last two prizes, and then we'll spend the rest of the time answering some questions.
All right, let's do it. Last wheel of names. You guys see the wheel of names?
I do. I'm excited for some winners.
The last $100 DoorDash gift card. Evan C. $100 DoorDash food.
Nice.
And the last one is a VIN Foundation Rumpel blanket. Ariel L. Congratulations. Back to you, Tony.
All right, excellent. I'm going to go in through the questions here. I need to reshare my screen. This is really goofy. Let's see. All right, you guys see my screen again?
Yep, that looks great, Tony.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I am looking in, let's see. I still see some questions. How soon before after graduation should we apply for IBR? So you can't apply before you graduate, right? And you can't apply until your grace period is ending, right? So about 30, 60 days before your grace period ends, you can submit your application, but they won't actually put your loans into that plan until after the grace period expires. In order for that to take effect sooner, you would have to use the consolidation loan, right? I know this is a really confusing aspect of it. I saw another question about which repayment options are available, and these are the ones that you can actually apply for, right, for income-driven plans. So the question was specifically, and I'm not seeing it right now, I saw it a second ago, which income-driven options are still available. Here are the three that are available to you. Right now, you'll either apply for these as part of the consolidation loan or separately as your grace period is expiring, right? So you're either going to choose to consolidate, in which case, if you choose an income-driven plan, you'll select one of these options as part of the consolidation option, or you're going to bypass the consolidation loan altogether. And about 30 or 60 days before your grace period ends, you're going to submit this application for your income-driven plan using the income documentation you have available, hopefully that tax return that you filed for 2024. Right? That's the timeline of events there for getting your loans into a repayment plan. And if you don't do anything or any of those things, the standard 10-year plan is selected for you by default. If undergrad, unsubsidized, and subsidized loans are in deferment, can those be added to a consolidation loan? Yes. Loans, the requirements or the requirements for being eligible for consolidation are in a grace period, in repayment, or in deferment, right? Except for in-school deferment, right? So if you're direct unsubsidized loans and subsidized loans from before veterinary school had already been in repayment, right? They're going to be ready for consolidation immediately after you graduate, right? If not, you're going to have to end their grace period along with your veterinary school loans grace period if you want to start repayment sooner or wait until the grace periods expire. How do you find out who your loan servicer is for your health profession student loans? Log into your school financial aid account, right? You should be able to find the loan servicer information in your school financial aid account. Oh, here's a good one. So would a 1-year small animal rotating internship at an academic institution be considered a academic program? In other words, would it automatically enter that in-school deferment status? No, an internship by itself is not. It requires you to be enrolled in school at least half time, and those internships are not part of that type of program, right? Residencies are, especially at academic institutions. Residencies at academic institutions will often have a school component with it that has you in school for at least half time. Sorry, I think I'm trying to go through these questions here, and some of them are disappearing before I get a chance to read them out loud. The $1 million question: is it possible for forgiveness to get taken away after I have already selected an IBR plan and made payments? Well, up until about a month ago, I would have said yes, or not yes, but they're currently considering taking away the IBR 2014 plan. Whether or not that's legal, I guess we're going to find out, right? If they actually go through with that plan, right? So we have seen forgiveness, and I mentioned this earlier as part of the table that I had showed you earlier. Sorry for all the flipping through all of this stuff here, trying to find that one. I got it in here twice, and now I can't find it when I'm looking for it. Here it is. So you can get forgiveness credit, right? And I would encourage everybody here to try to get forgiveness credit, because you never know if you're going to need it, right? And you only get forgiveness credit using an income-driven plan. However, right now, with the recent court rulings and this administration's interpretation of those court rulings, they're no longer honoring forgiveness for plans like SAVE, Pay As You Earn, and ICR. Meaning, if you hit the maximum repayment period and still have a balance while you're using one of those plans, they're not going to cancel your loans. We don't know exactly what happens if they don't cancel the loans, right? There's really no rules set up for that. So we have to kind of wait and see, well, what does that mean, right? And chances are they're going to just push people out of these plans into something else. And now the IBR plans still do offer forgiveness, right? You get credit for forgiveness and you can still receive forgiveness once you've reached the maximum number of payments to be eligible for the forgiveness. Right now, this is income-driven plan forgiveness, not public service loan forgiveness. Right? Public service loan forgiveness is different. Right? It takes 10 years. You use one of these income-driven plans, but you earn public service loan forgiveness credit if you're also working for a qualifying nonprofit. Right? So this is where we are with whether or not you can receive forgiveness credit and also then earn forgiveness. Right? But you guys are way early in the repayment process, right? So you're concerned more with getting the forgiveness credit, right? So if I were any of you, I would be looking towards pay-as-you-earn or the new version of IBR to establish my minimum monthly payment and start earning the forgiveness credit, right? Where you ultimately end up, we've got some time to let that unfold and see, right? But if you want to have a manageable monthly payment, use one of the income-driven plans, earn that forgiveness credit, and start running some simulations to see if you're set to hit forgiveness, right? And that's where I'm gonna come back to our examples. So let me back up here, try to get to my tabs that we got going here. Right? So the higher your balance, your starting balance, the more likely it is that you're going to reach forgiveness. Let's use this one to illustrate, right? So this is a person who's going to head internship, residency. We've got some good information on what their income is and what they think their income is going to be after their training. They think they're going to pay $1,000 a month using pay-as-you-earn. I'm going to check this income-driven repayment eligibility tab. That is one of the options they can use. They can also use the new version of IBR. Either one of those is fine for right now. I'm going to send that information over to the student loan repayment simulator. I'm going to say a 1-year internship, 55,000. Let's say a residency at 3 years. Let's just call it 60,000. And then when we're done, it'll be the 180 that they're projecting. Right. I'm going to presume that they have a tax return on file that they can use to apply for their income-driven repayment plan. It'll automatically make those adjustments in the income projection, assuming that your income that you'd be using right now would be 0 or very low. The 2026 is going to be half a year's worth of your internship income. And then finally, when we get to year 3, we're going to see something that looks like our residency income or internship income blend, right? That's going to continue. And then when we finish our residency, we're going to have a blend between our residency income, our post-residency income, and then the rest of it's going to increase by the percentage that we indicated here. Right, I'm going to leave the family information out of here just because it adds additional complexities that we're not going to have time to deal with just right now. The simulator settings, if I'm going to hit forgiveness, what's the tax going to be? Growth rate. This has to do with how they calculate your monthly payment using an income-driven plan. If I'm going to hit forgiveness, I'm going to save for that potential tax, put that money into something that's going to earn some kind of return. We just get you started there. And once you have a forgiveness savings plan running, you can enter that into the simulator. This is going to give me an idea, again, if I don't do anything, right, my minimum monthly payment on my loans are going to be $4,200 a month, right, which in this case is not realistic during an internship or residency, right? It's going to exceed my earnings, right? So it's not very practical. So IBR 2014, pay as you earn, I can have that $0 monthly payment. The payments will be very low for the first 2 years, right? If I keep working my way down, I see I have a pretty hefty amount forgiven because I had a pretty significant starting balance. If I pay a tax of 30% on that, this is how much I need 20 years from now. In this particular case, it's significantly less than trying to pay it off, even though I know I can't do that during that internship or residency pathway. Right. So this is how you can plug numbers into the simulator to start to see what those are going to look like. Now, you can't get too wrapped up in this just yet because we don't exactly know what forgiveness is going to look like long term. But I could still use these plans to help get myself through my internship year, my residency year, pay attention to what's going on with student loans to see if I need to make an adjustment. Right. But that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to keep my loans manageable during this post-graduation period, particularly internship residency in this case. But the same would apply if I'm doing private clinical practice. I want to keep my loans at it with a reasonably low minimum monthly payment. Here, we could take the internship residency stuff out of here. Right. Let's say I'm starting with a starting income a little higher. Hit the reduce second year's income button again. Right. I want to start looking at the differences between using those income-driven plans to keep my minimum monthly payment low so I can build my financial wellness strategy without having my loans suck most of that income into the Department of Education. Right. And even here, still projected to pay less in total. But again, I'm not paying too much attention to that right now because of all of the uncertainty around the repayment options. If some of your federal student loans are set up in a standard repayment plan, can you switch them? Absolutely. You can switch. You can always switch repayment plans, but you want to keep some of that repayment plan switching to a minimum. If I've already enrolled in a dual DVM PhD program, is it too late to consolidate? Probably, right? But it depends on whether or not your PhD program has you enrolled in school. Right. So if you're still enrolled in school, your loans are going to be stuck in that in-school deferment status that doesn't allow them to be consolidated. Right. So it depends on your enrollment, your school enrollment status. Oh, here's a good one. So kind of coming back, and these are all great questions. I'm going to pull up the consolidation thing again. So if I wait 12 months to consolidate my health profession student loans, and then all of my interest over the past year will capitalize. Your health profession student, if you wait 12 months to consolidate your health profession student loans, there won't be any interest on the health profession student loans to be added to your principal, right? So that presumes that you're going to capitalize or you're going to consolidate all of the loans together, right? If you're going to wait the 12 months to receive the interest-free credit, the 12-month grace period on the health profession student loans, then you're probably going to want to consolidate that loan only, right? I don't think you're going to want to consolidate the health profession student loans with all of your direct loans 12 months down the road, because then, yeah, you're going to add 12 months of interest from your direct loans to that principal balance, right? But if you wanted to maximize the grace period, the 12-month grace period of the health profession student loan, you can consolidate only it and not include your direct loans with it, right? But let's look at your details on the message board and see if that makes the most sense. But that's how I would be thinking about that one. Coming back to the health profession student loans are coming up a lot here. So if you consolidate your older undergrad loans with your vet school loans and health profession student loans, does that mean you don't get a grace period of 6 months? So if you're going to consolidate, you're going to want to end the grace period, right? There's no reason to consolidate and not select the do not delay processing option, right? I think we indicated that here, or maybe it is here, When you go through the consolidation application, you want to select the do not delay processing option, right? That is what ends the grace period early. It's hard for me to conceive of a circumstance where you would submit a consolidation loan but still let the grace period play out, right? One of the primary reasons we're using the consolidation loan is to end the grace period early in the circumstances where it makes sense to do so. Right, so if I'm going to submit the consolidation application, I'm going to select the do not delay processing option. Right, now again, if there's a reason why you would submit the consolidation application and postpone the consolidation application processing, right? So you preserve the grace period, if you will, right? Then please let's talk about that on the message boards and see if there's a reason for you to do that. But I can't say that I've ever seen that, right? I don't know that that's going to work out very well. It kind of defeats the point of the consolidation, because if you do that, if you don't select the do not delay processing option and submit the consolidation loan application, they'll hold the application until the grace period expires. Right, so now the grace period has run its course. Your loans have accrued more interest. When they consolidate, they're going to add more interest to the principal. You've kind of defeated the purpose of ending the grace period early. Right, so if you're going to consolidate, do it as soon as your loans allow after you graduate, and select the do not delay processing option. Okay, so moving away from the consolidation questions, this one falls into more of a financial wellness situation. How would a large sign-on bonus, more than the expected annual salary, affect the monthly income-driven payment? It depends. It's a great question. So it depends on when you receive the signing bonus, right? Did you receive that before you graduated and maybe it was on your 2024 tax return, right? Will you receive it in 2025, right? Which means it hasn't hit your tax return yet, right? It'll hit your tax return when you file your taxes for 2025 and early 2026, right? But if you have an outsized source of income, right? So you may not want to use your tax return when you document your income for your income-driven repayment plan, right? So you have an option to use either your tax return, or if your tax return represents a higher number than you're currently earning, you have the option of using what's called alternative documentation of income, right? So if your recent tax return is much higher for some reason that isn't representative of your current income, then you could forego using the adjusted gross income from that recent tax return that may show that higher signing bonus, and use a pay stub that will not show that that's an ongoing source of income to have a minimum monthly payment that's based on a more regular source of your earnings, right? So if you have, it depends on the timing of when you receive that signing bonus, but that's another one where, again, it would be great to hear those details or see those details, and that the message board is a great place for that, where you can tell us what tax year that you're expecting to receive that, you know, what your income is likely to be otherwise outside of that, and we can help, you know, guide you in terms of applying for income-driven repayment, even in the source of those signing bonuses like that. Coming back to the signing bonuses, this is another question that came up during the signalment form submission. So is it smart to accept a contract that puts bonuses towards your student loans, or if you should take the bonus as a signing bonus instead? I would always rather have the money in my control rather than put towards something that, you know, may not be that beneficial. So in that instance, if they're giving me a choice between receiving the sign-on bonus directly to me versus being paid directly towards my student loans, I'm always going to take the option that it's paid directly to me instead, because then I can choose how much of it, if any, go towards my student loans or go towards other areas of my overall financial wellness. I know we're, geez, 2 hours in at this point. So I want to show you 2 hours and 15 minutes in the student debt message board area. I kept referring to that. For those of you that submitted signalment forms and requested an anonymous post to the boards, it is either already in queue and it's coming here, right? We see that a bunch of these are actually making their way over to the message boards, but this is what they look like, right? So this area is full of thousands and thousands of posts from our colleagues, new grads and otherwise, talking about student loans, trying to get an idea of how best to get started in repayment. And they're anonymized, right? So Dr. Mears and I know who you are, but the rest of the community does not. But we'll go through these submissions, do a good physical exam of your student loans. This is where we can get that information about, did you get a signing bonus? Where did it happen? How did it hit your adjusted gross income on your tax return, right? What are you hoping to do with your financial wellness, right? So, and we'll go through, address all of these items on the message boards. It gives you kind of a medical record, so to speak, a place that you can return back to, digest this information. I know it's a ton of information. Continue to ask questions and keep working through it as you're processing these different stages of repayment and as they overlap with your career changes and such, right? Those are great opportunities to stop back in here. I try to apply for a consolidation. Maybe something's happening that doesn't match what we're telling you. We can try to help, get the train back on the rails, right? Maybe you're still not sure exactly how to proceed. Post in here will help navigate you through the questions that you have when it comes to repayment. So use that resource to your advantage. When it comes to starting a financial wellness strategy, focus on these things first. Right? There was a good chunk of you that indicated you had credit card debt as well, right? I mean, we want to make sure we eliminate those sorts of things before we start paying extra towards our federal student loans, right? So, let's take stock of what we are currently dealing with, make sure we take advantage of the flexibility that our federal student loans provide and start working on some of these other things before we start sending our money over to the Department of Education. All right, so let's see. I keep looking for some questions here that jump out. So still, I'm still sensing some, and I totally get it, right? I mean, the loan status stuff is really confusing, particularly if you have loans from undergrad that have already been in repayment. So Caitlin's asking if you have undergrad loans that were consolidated or entering repayment shortly after graduation, should you try to apply for an income-driven plan right now or enter deferment and wait until vet school loans enter their grace period to try to consolidate them all together to be on one loan? Yeah, that's going to depend. I think if you would benefit from consolidating all of your loans together, then wait until your vet school loans enter their grace period and consolidate them all. Right now, you may have to reach out to your loan servicer to get those undergrad loans that are entering repayment into some kind of forbearance status while you wait for the consolidation application to be processed, right? Consolidations can take 30 to 60 days, right? If you have loans that enter repayment after you graduate, they're going to expect a payment maybe 30 days after you graduate, right? The consolidation may not be done by then. The payments are still due on those other loans. So you either have to apply for a repayment separate for those plans or request a forbearance telling them, hey, I'm going to consolidate all these together. Can you just give me a month or two for that to happen? And then hopefully all of that will take place while you don't have to continue making payments on those other loans. Right. So if you have older loans, it can complicate things for sure. But there are ways to work around that. I see Chris is asking on the IBR sheet, your taxable income, is that for 2024 or 2025? In other words, do you mean is there other income from 2024? So the way that the income-driven plans work, they require documentation of your income, and they'll always accept a recently filed tax return. The most recent tax return that we have access to is from 2024, right? So it will be the measure of your 2024 income that they would use to calculate that IBR payment. They wouldn't use the 2025 income, your current income, until you file a 2025 tax return, which happens in early 2026. Or if you didn't have a tax return on file for 2024, they'll ask you what your current income is in 2025, and they'll use that to calculate your IBR payment. It's always on a year lag, right? Which can be helpful, particularly for new grads, right? Graduating in 2025, if you had a tax return on file from 2024 that showed little or no income, right? Even if you're starting your job in June or July here soon, getting paid whatever, right? They'll still take that adjusted gross income from 2024 to calculate that payment for the first 12 months. And that's what gives you that breathing room to work on all of these other things, right? And then when you file your taxes for 2025, right, it'll show the income you earned in 2025, which is probably going to be about half of your annual salary because you're graduating halfway through the year, right? Your payment will be lower than your income technically shows, but they allow that. It kind of builds an on-ramp for your repayment over those first couple of years. How long does it take for an IDR application to process? That's a hard question to answer right now. They're on a backlog from all of the fits and starts we've had from the recent court rulings and changes to income-driven repayment. They're starting to ramp those up, but they've got a pretty big backlog to work through. If you're submitting a consolidation, that'll probably get processed again within that 30 to 60 day time frame. If you're not submitting a consolidation, again, you can't really apply for those IDR plans until your grace period is coming to an end. So that gives you a little bit more time for them to work through some of that backlog. Hopefully it's not going to take any more than a couple of months, but it may, right? It really depends on how things go with this big backlog. The consolidations seem to be still taking that 30, 60 day time frame, but the income-driven plan applications outside of that, it really kind of depends. So hopefully by the time your grace periods are ending, or the time you have to submit an income-driven repayment application, they'll have those backlogs, worked through. For in-school deferment, how can I get out of that to consolidate and start IBR? Yeah, you really can't, right? So if your loans are in an in-school deferment, you have to wait until you're no longer enrolled in school, right? So i.e. graduation, or you leave that program for a significant amount of time where your loans exit that in-school deferment, right? Graduation will end it, right? Otherwise, you have to exit a program or be no longer enrolled for, I think it's 6 months before that status will change. Oh yeah, great question. Is it safer to just start in IBR since they are trying to eliminate pay? Ooh, they're also trying to eliminate IBR, right? So, they're both kind of in that same status, right? But neither one of those things are going to, as soon as that would happen would be at least a year, right? So probably, you can choose either, right? But you'll have to kind of watch and reevaluate. But, I wouldn't, technically speaking, pay as you earn would be a better choice, because if you move out of pay as you earn, it won't capitalize your interest. If you end up having to move out of IBR, it can capitalize your unpaid interest, right? So if I were going to choose between one of them, I would probably lean towards pay as you earn. However, pay as you earn also has its own issues, right? You can't actually receive forgiveness long-term with it. But we're not talking about long-term here. We're talking more about short-term. You have to consolidate for public service loan forgiveness? No, you do not, right? If you have all direct loans, right, they're already eligible for public service loan forgiveness as long as you're doing all of the other things that you need to receive public service loan forgiveness credit. But you do not have to consolidate to receive public service loan forgiveness. If I am able to pay off all my interest prior to consolidation, and I don't think I'll qualify for forgiveness, would that be a reason to delay and let the grace period run out? One, a couple of things there. I would not try to pay the interest during your grace period. Again, you've got better things you can do with your money during that time frame. Your student loans, so we think about your student loans, and even if I look at them, right, in the examples we've been using, yeah, some of them have some higher interest rates, but this is not a terrible interest rate on debt right now, right? So I don't really understand the urgency to pay off interest during a grace period, right? Give yourself some time to earn some income, update your budget, get some other aspects of your financial plan started, right? I'm not really eager to do that. And if you don't think you're going to qualify for forgiveness, I'm not sure it makes sense for you to consolidate at all, right? So I don't know that I would rush to pay the interest off before I consolidate for loans that I don't think I'm going to reach forgiveness on. So unless I'm missing something there, I wouldn't do those things, right? So if you don't think you're going to hit forgiveness, then just let your grace period expire and consider either an income-driven plan as it's expiring, or you can leave your loans in that standard 10-year plan if you want to. But I don't know that I would rush to pay the interest during that grace period time frame. Can you ask your loan servicer to waive your in-school deferment status? No, unfortunately not. Yeah, I did it during, FYI, you can ask your loan servicer to waive your in-school deferment status. I did it during my schooling post-DVM because I worked full-time and went to school full-time, and it was counting toward public service loan forgiveness. Yeah, I think that was under a different repayment landscape, right? That I don't think you can do that anymore, right? So be careful there, right? You might be able to do that with Grad Plus loans, but it's not going to work with your direct unsubsidized loans. So that, again, there was some windows there where we were able to do some very strange things like consolidate while you were in school, and those windows have closed. So just be very careful there. So and even if you ask your loan servicer and they tell you that yes, they can do that, I would double check that that's actually happening, right? So that I have not seen any evidence that you can do that now. I have seen some evidence of what you're reporting, a few years ago, but that would be extremely difficult to do right now. How does a new proposed repayment wrap, what they're calling the repayment assistance plan, compare to IBR? It's the repayment assistance plan is better than the old version of IBR, but worse than the new version, right? So if it passes as is, there can be some utility for it. It has a 30-year time frame until you are able to reach. They don't call it forgiveness; they just call it cancellation. So, but technically they're the same thing. So, but it would take 30 years for you to get there. So it's, we're going to have to do some number crunching on that one to see how it actually matches up. But from a monthly payment standpoint, it's better than the old version of IBR. It's worse than a new version. Oh, great question. If an IDR application is taking months to process, do we have to make payments under a standard 10-year plan until the application is fully processed? No. So if the application takes longer than 60 days, they will put the loans into a forbearance, right? So hopefully it won't take longer than 60 days, but they shouldn't push you into a 10-year plan payment if they can't get the application processed in a timely manner. They have processing forbearance options for that. All right. Sorry, I'm just, yep, go ahead.
Tony, will you show one more time how to get to the message boards from the Student Debt Center?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on the Student Debt Center here. If you're logged into VIN, right, there'll be a link in the navigation bar here directly. If you're not logged in, then once you log in, you'll see it, right? So I'm logged into VIN here on the Student Debt Center. I'm going to click on the Student Debt Message Board area. It'll take me into VIN. It'll take me directly to the Student Debt folder, and then I can either scroll, depending on how you have your preferences set up in VIN, you'll either see a few of these or a whole laundry list of them. And then you can pick and choose any of these, or you can even, if you want to, you can use search and search through the discussions to try to match things that are more specific to your circumstances and see what discussions pop up that look like those sorts of things. When you post here, you'll have an option to post anonymously, right? So here's some instructions that pop up for how best to post in the Student Debt Message Board area. And there's the anonymous box right above the post message button. Right. I think I'm going to, if I didn't get to your question here live, my apologies. We'll do an assessment of some of these questions and try to maybe address some of them generally in an FAQ document that we'll post with the session. But we're gonna end the marathon here, if you will. Hopefully, I made things a little bit more clear instead of less clear. I know that the consolidation thing is really, really complex this year, so please continue to ask questions, post those questions to the message boards. The message boards definitely give us a little bit more runway to answer these questions for your circumstances. It's been really, really hard to come up with guidelines for consolidation this particular grad year. I apologize for that. It's just kind of a mess. But we'll work through them, and hopefully by the time you're starting your respective positions, we'll have some guidance for you to either pursue consolidation or not, depending on your specific circumstances. Thank you, Dr. Mears, for moderating, and Jordan for drawing prizes, and Dr. Gadsden for stopping by to talk about some of the other VIN Foundation resources.
Thank you, Tony, for sharing your knowledge and trying to help all of us work through this for sure.
Yeah, thank you to the the diehards that stayed here for the duration, for the long haul. So yeah, I know that this one was a little messier than most. So hopefully we'll get to a point where these are a little more straightforward, but
yes, hopefully
it's probably going to get a little messier before it gets cleaner. But we'll do what we can.
I think it is worth saying on that note that even if you do not continue to be a VIN member past graduation, we hope that you would like to and want to, but even if you do not, you still have access to this Student Debt Message Board area to Tony and I, all of the VIN Foundation resources, because it's from the VIN Foundation, which is the nonprofit arm of VIN, all of that is free, open to use, regardless of VIN member status. So just keep that in mind as things change. We'll be trying to keep you updated with what's going on and answering questions.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even if you've already posted and you lose access to VIN, in between conversations, you'll still always have access to those discussions that you can come back and post to. It'll require that username and password you have, and you won't have full access to the other areas of VIN, but you'll always have access to that student debt discussion, so you can keep getting those questions for your student loans answered.
Thank you all so much. That follow-up email with the recording, Tony's Prezi, all sorts of other helpful information will be coming in the next couple of days. It takes some time on our end, so it should be by no later than this weekend. But just keep an eye out for that to come from studentdebt@vinfoundation.org. And for the prize winners, we'll be reaching out to you via email to figure out how to get that to you as well.
Excellent. Yeah, congratulations to those of you that won, and congratulations to everybody for graduation too. So looking forward to helping as you get started in your careers and try to get these student loans taken care of so you don't have to worry about them too much. All right. Well, thanks everybody.